His eyes burned into mine as the entire court held its breath. "This woman carries the blood of a forgotten lineage," the Alpha King declared, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. My heart hammered against my ribs as every gaze in the ballroom turned to me, the servant girl who didn't belong. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're watching from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. "The Alpha King wants to see you," they said, and within minutes the guards dragged me to the throne under his burning gaze. I still remember the sound of boots striking marble, the rhythmic echo that seemed to measure each beat of my terrified heart. The hall was too vast for someone like me. With every step, the weight of the air increased, and the cold from the stone columns seeped through my skin as if the castle itself rejected my presence. I trembled. Not just from fear, but from the consciousness of standing before the one everyone feared, and who, for some unfathomable reason, had asked for me. I never understood what fate intended with my life. I was raised in the shadows of the palace, daughter of a servant who died before teaching me the name of love. I grew up among whispers and contained laughter, sweeping corridors where no one looked down, except to order me into silence. And yet somehow, my name began to circulate within these walls, whispered, distorted, heavy with rumors I couldn't comprehend. They said I held a secret, that there was something about me that disturbed the eyes of the powerful. I didn't know what it was. I only felt it, as if an invisible mark pulsed beneath my skin. The first time I saw him, he said nothing. The king. The one they called Alpha. His presence was like a blast of hot air cutting through ice. Tall, impenetrable, with eyes the color of burnt iron. When he lifted his face, I had the sensation that the entire hall bowed. No one dared breathe while he observed, and when his gaze fell upon me, something inside me shattered in silence. There was no tenderness, nor cruelty, just a power so absolute it made me wish to disappear. "You brought her as I commanded." "Your Majesty," said one of the guards, bowing low. "Leave her." His voice cut through the air like a blade. Deep, slow, unhurried. We were alone. I didn't know where to place my hands. There was blood on my wrists left by the shackles. He noticed. His gaze descended, fixed itself, and for an instant seemed sorrowful. Or perhaps it was just the torchlight reflecting in his eyes. "They say you fear me," he murmured, approaching. "They say many things, Your Majesty, and all of them seem to contradict me." The silence that followed was a battlefield. I felt the heat of his presence drawing near, the sound of heavy fabric from his robes dragging on the floor. There was something in him that transcended dominion, a magnetism that trapped the soul before the body. When he stopped before me, so close I could smell the woody perfume mixed with the scent of iron, I understood why everyone bowed. He didn't need to raise his voice to subjugate the world. The king circled around me, like a predator around something he couldn't decide whether to hunt or protect. "You look like her," he said low. "Like whom, Your Majesty?" He didn't answer. But when he lightly touched the ribbon that hung from my neck, the amulet that had been my mother's, I realized he had recognized something. "Where did you get this?" "It's all I have. And everything I lack." Those words echoed deep as if a veil had been torn. Before I could ask, he stepped away, his expression hardening again. "Don't mention what you heard here. And if someone asks you the reason for this audience, tell them the king wanted to know if there are still voices in the castle that dare to dream." I stood there, not knowing if it was a warning or a confession. In the days that followed, the palace seemed to watch me. The ladies whispered. The councillors avoided crossing paths with me. The queen's stepmother, who always looked at me like someone observing an insect, called for me one morning. "You've walked too close to the throne," she said, smiling like someone offering poison. Powerful men are enchanted by what they don't understand, but such enchantments come at a steep price. Her words were venom wrapped in silk, and yet there was an omen in them. The nights became longer. I heard footsteps in the corridor, doors opening by themselves, muffled voices discussing my name. And then came the invitation or the sentence. The winter ball. All eyes on me. I had no right to be there, but the order had come from the king himself. When I entered the ballroom, the murmur spread like fire. It's her. I wore the only dress I possessed, a simple one, but clean. I felt gazes piercing my skin like needles. The elite examined me with that cruel pleasure of those who wait for another's mistake. And he was there on the throne, motionless, watching. The weight of his gaze sustained my presence. The music ceased. "Bring her to the center," ordered the king. The hall opened, and I walked between the stairs and contained laughter. I could hear the ladies betting among themselves how many minutes I would last. But when I arrived before him, the alpha rose. The silence was total. "This woman," he said, "carries the symbol of a lineage the palace has forgotten, and I will not allow forgetfulness to destroy her." It was like thunder. The stepmother paled, the nobles exchanged glances, and I didn't know whether to thank him or fear. The king looked at me, and in that instant, I saw in his eyes something that wasn't pity. It was recognition, a thread of destiny that united our ruins. Since that night, nothing was the same. My name began to circulate aloud as both threat and promise. I knew he was watching me even when he pretended indifference. And I also knew that there were secrets between us, ancient as blood, deep as the silence that surrounded him. The palace transformed into a labyrinth of suspicious glances and hushed conversations. Where once I had been invisible, sweeping through corridors like a ghost, now I felt every pair of eyes tracking my movements. The servants who had once ignored me now whispered behind my back, their voices carrying a mixture of envy and fear. I had been elevated from nothing to something, but what that something was remained a mystery even to me. Lady Morgana, the Queen's stepmother, became my most visible enemy. She was a woman carved from marble and malice, with silver hair pulled so tight it seemed to stretch her pale skin. Her lips, always painted the color of dried blood, curved into smiles that promised suffering. She had ruled the palace's social hierarchy for decades, and my sudden prominence threatened her carefully constructed order. "The king's little foundling thinks she belongs among us now," I heard her say to her circle of loyal followers during afternoon tea. Her voice carried through the gardens where I was tending to the roses, a task I had been given to keep me occupied and, I suspected, visible to those who wished to see me humbled. I felt the thorns bite into my fingers as I gripped the stems too tightly, drawing blood that matched the crimson petals. The pain grounded me, reminded me that despite the king's declaration, I was still the same girl who had grown up sleeping on a straw mattress in the servants' quarters, whose hands bore the calluses of endless labor. That evening, as I returned to my chambers, now a small but private room in the upper floors, another sign of my changed status, I found a gift waiting on my pillow. A dress of midnight blue silk, adorned with silver threads that caught the candlelight like stars. There was no note, but I knew who had sent it. The king's gifts were always magnificent and always came without explanation. I held the dress against my body, feeling the luxurious fabric slide between my fingers. It was beautiful beyond anything I had ever owned, but it also felt like armor. Protection against the battles I sensed were coming. When I looked at myself in the small mirror, I barely recognized the reflection. The girl with tangled hair and rough hands was still there, but she was being slowly transformed into something else, something I wasn't sure I was ready to become. The transformation wasn't just external. I began to notice changes in how I carried myself, how I spoke. The timid whisper that had been my voice was growing stronger, more confident. When Lady Morgana's followers tried to trip me in the hallways or spill wine on my dress during dinner, I no longer apologized or cowered. Instead, I met their eyes with a steady gaze that made them look away first. But it was the dreams that disturbed me most. Every night, I was visited by visions of a woman who looked like me but older, with the same dark hair and green eyes. She stood in a grand chamber I didn't recognize, wearing a crown of silver and moonstone. In the dreams, she reached out to me, her lips moving in words I couldn't hear. When I woke, my mother's amulet would be warm against my skin, as if it had absorbed the heat of those ethereal encounters. One morning, I decided to seek answers. The palace library was a vast chamber filled with ancient tomes and scrolls, most covered in dust and forgotten by all except the elderly librarian, Master Benedict. He was a kind man with gentle eyes who had always treated me with more respect than my station warranted. "I'm looking for information about old bloodlines," I told him, keeping my voice casual. "Noble families that might have been forgotten." His eyes sharpened with interest. "Ah, the forgotten ones. Yes, there are many such stories in these old books. Families that fell from grace, bloodlines that were erased from official records." He paused, studying my face carefully. "Is there a particular name you're seeking?" I showed him my mother's amulet, the small silver pendant with its intricate design of intertwining roses and thorns. His face went pale as recognition dawned. "Where did you get this?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "It was my mother's. It's all she left me." Master Benedict disappeared into the depths of the library, returning with a leather-bound tome so old its pages seemed ready to crumble at a touch. He opened it carefully, revealing an illustration that made my breath catch. There, painted in faded colours, was the exact design of my amulet. "The House of Rosethorn," he read in a reverent whisper. "Royal bloodline, extinct for over 20 years. They were eliminated after accusations of treason against the crown." He looked up at me with something approaching awe. "My dear child, if this amulet is authentic, then you are—" "I am what?" I pressed, though part of me already suspected the answer. "The last of your line. The lost Princess of Rosethorn." The words hit me like a physical blow. Everything began to make sense. The king's recognition, the way he had touched my amulet with such reverence, his declaration at the ball. He hadn't been protecting a servant girl out of kindness. He had been acknowledging what he had always known. I was royal blood, hidden away for my own protection. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my small chamber, my mind racing with questions and implications. If I was truly of royal blood, what did that mean for my future? What had happened to my family? And most importantly, what role did the Alpha King play in their fate? As if summoned by my thoughts, there was a soft knock at my door. When I opened it, I found not a servant with a message, but the king himself standing in the shadows of the corridor. My heart stopped at the sight of him. In the dim light, with his dark hair falling across his forehead and his powerful frame filling the doorway, he looked less like a monarch and more like the dangerous predator I had always sensed him to be. "We need to talk," he said simply, and stepped into my chamber without waiting for permission. His presence filled my small chamber like smoke, overwhelming and inescapable. I pressed my back against the door, acutely aware that we were alone in the intimate space where I slept, where my most private thoughts dwelled. The king moved through the room slowly, his fingers trailing over my few possessions with an almost reverent touch. "You've been asking questions," he said without turning around. It wasn't an accusation, merely a statement of fact, but I felt caught nonetheless. "I have a right to know who I am," I replied, surprised by the strength in my own voice. He turned then, and the intensity in his eyes made my knees weak. "Do you? Sometimes knowledge is a burden heavier than ignorance. Sometimes the truth destroys rather than liberates. Then why did you claim me publicly? Why reveal what you obviously knew all along?" A shadow crossed his features, and for a moment he looked younger, more vulnerable. "Because Lady Morgana was planning to have you eliminated. She had discovered your identity and saw you as a threat to her power. The only way to protect you was to claim you first, to make you untouchable." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I had thought Lady Morgana simply disliked me for my sudden elevation. I hadn't realized she saw me as dangerous enough to kill. "Eliminated," I whispered. I mean she had arranged for an accident. Poison in your food, a fall down the stairs, any number of things that would remove you quietly from the board." His jaw clenched with barely controlled fury. "I couldn't allow that to happen." "Why?" The question escaped before I could stop it. "Why do you care what happens to me?" He was silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion I had never heard from him before. "Because I failed to protect your family once before. I won't make that mistake again." The words hung in the air between us like a confession and a curse. I felt the room spin around me as the implications sank in. "You knew them," I breathed. "You knew my parents. I knew your mother." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Rosalind she was everything good in this dark world. Beautiful, kind, brave beyond measure. She was supposed to marry me. The revelation struck me like lightning. My mother had been betrothed to the Alpha King. I was not just of royal blood, I was connected to him by bonds I had never imagined. What happened? I managed to ask, though I dreaded the answer. He moved to the window, staring out at the moonlit gardens below. Politics, power, the same forces that shape every royal life. My father and hers arranged our betrothal when we were children. We grew up knowing we would rule together someday. And he paused, his hands clenching into fists. I fell in love with her. Truly, deeply, completely. I felt a sharp pang that I didn't want to examine too closely. Jealousy of my own mother? The thought was absurd. Yet the emotion was undeniably real. But she didn't love you, I said, somehow knowing it was true. She loved another. A minor lord, someone deemed unsuitable by both our families. When she came to me and begged to be released from our betrothal, He turned back to me, his eyes filled with old pain. I loved her enough to let her go. I broke the engagement, knowing it would cause a scandal, knowing my father would be furious. And your father, Lord Marcus of Rosethorn, took her and fled the kingdom. They married in secret, had you, lived in hiding for years. I thought they were safe. His voice broke. I thought love would be enough to protect them. But it wasn't. No, my father never forgave the insult. When he discovered where they were hiding, he branded them traitors and sent assassins. They died protecting you, hiding you with the servants who raised you. His eyes met mine with devastating intensity. You were 3 years old. You probably don't remember them. I didn't. But suddenly the dreams made sense. The woman reaching out to me had been my mother, trying to connect across the veil of death. The warmth of the amulet when I woke was her love, still protecting me even now. So you see, the king continued, I am responsible for their deaths. If I had been stronger, if I had protected them better, if I had never let them go. You gave them what they wanted most, I said softly. The freedom to love each other. That's not something to regret. He stared at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. You're so much like her, he whispered. The same grace, the same kindness, even in the face of tragedy. But I'm not her, I said firmly. I'm not my mother, and you're not the same man who let her go. We are who we choose to be, not who we were born to be. Something shifted in his expression, a recognition that sent heat flooding through my veins. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. No, he said quietly, you're not her. You're yourself, and that's... He reached out, his fingers barely brushing my cheek. That's infinitely more dangerous. The touch sent electricity through my entire body. I should have stepped back, should have remembered the vast difference in our stations, should have been afraid. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, my eyes fluttering closed at the gentle contact. Your Majesty, I whispered, not sure if it was a protest or a plea. Marcus, he said. When we're alone, call me Marcus. It was your father's name too. The intimacy of using his given name felt like crossing a line from which there would be no return. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized I had crossed that line the moment he first touched my amulet, the moment he recognized who I was and chose to protect me. Marcus, I repeated, tasting his name on my lips like forbidden fruit. He groaned softly, as if my voice speaking his name caused him physical pain. You should send me away, he said, but he didn't move back. If anything, he seemed to lean closer. Should I asked, feeling bold and reckless in a way I had never experienced before. What would the proper thing be? The proper thing would be for me to arrange your marriage to some suitable lord, to restore your family's lands and titles, to see you settled safely away from court intrigue. His hand was still on my cheek, his thumb stroking across my skin with agonizing gentleness. The proper thing would be to forget these feelings, to do my duty as your sovereign and nothing more. And what would the improper thing be? His eyes darkened with an intensity that made my breath catch. The improper thing would be to kiss you until you forget every name but mine, to claim you as mine and damn the consequences, to love you the way I never got the chance to love her. The air between us crackled with tension so thick I could barely breathe. We stood on the precipice of something that would change everything. Something that could destroy us both or elevate us beyond imagination. Then be improper, I whispered, my voice barely audible but carrying all the longing I had been trying to deny. He didn't need to be asked twice. His lips crashed down on mine with a hunger that spoke of years of denial and want. I had never been kissed before, had never known the feel of a man's lips or the taste of desire, but my body seemed to know exactly what to do. I melted into him, my arms wrapping around his neck as he pulled me against the hard length of his body. The kiss deepened, becoming something wild and desperate. I could taste the whiskey on his lips, could feel the barely leashed power in his arms as they encircled me. When he finally pulled back, we were both breathing hard, both shaken by the intensity of what had just passed between us. "This changes everything," he said, his forehead resting against mine. "I know," I replied, and I did know. There would be no going back now, no pretending we were merely king and subject. We had crossed into dangerous territory, and I found that I didn't care about the consequences. The days following our kiss became a delicate dance of stolen glances and hidden moments. In public, we maintained the proper distance between sovereign and subject, but in private, the air between us crackled with unspoken promises and barely restrained passion. I found myself living for the brief encounters, his hand brushing mine as he passed my chair at dinner, the way his eyes would find me across a crowded room, the secret smile that was meant only for me. But our growing connection didn't go unnoticed. Lady Morgana watched us with the patience of a spider, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her followers reported every interaction, every meaningful look, every second we spent in each other's presence. I could feel the web of conspiracy tightening around us, but I was too intoxicated by Marcus's attention to care about the danger. It was during the Festival of the Harvest Moon that everything began to unravel. The entire court gathered in the Great Hall, dressed in their finest clothes and most elaborate masks. The tradition allowed for a certain amount of anonymity, a chance for normally rigid social barriers to blur, if only for one night. I wore the blue silk dress Marcus had given me, paired with a silver mask that concealed the upper half of my face. I felt beautiful for perhaps the first time in my life. The dress hugged my curves in ways that made me feel powerful and feminine, and the mask gave me a confidence I had never possessed before. When I entered the ballroom, I saw heads turn and heard whispered speculations about my identity. For once, the attention felt like admiration rather than scrutiny. Marcus found me within minutes, appearing at my side as if drawn by an invisible thread. He wore a black mask that somehow made his eyes appear even more intense, and his formal court attire emphasized the broad strength of his shoulders and the lean power of his frame. "You look magnificent," he murmured close to my ear, his breath sending shivers down my spine. "So do you," I replied, feeling bold behind my mask. The music began, and he extended his hand with a slight bow. "Will you honor me with a dance, my lady?" I placed my hand in his, feeling the now familiar electric shock of his touch. He led me onto the dance floor, and suddenly we were moving together as if we had been partners for years. His hand was warm and strong on my waist, guiding me through the intricate steps with fluid grace. "You dance beautifully," he said as we turned in perfect synchronization. "I've never danced like this before," I confessed. "I learned by watching from the servants' galleries." "Then you're a natural," he said, spinning me out and drawing me back into his arms. "Like everything else about you." The compliment made me blush beneath my mask. As the music swelled around us, I felt as if we were the only two people in the room. The rest of the court faded into background noise, and there was only Marcus's eyes burning into mine, only the heat of his body so close to mine, only the promise of what might come next. But the spell was broken when the music ended and a slow clap echoed from the edge of the dance floor. Lady Morgana approached us, resplendent in crimson silk and a golden mask that did nothing to hide her malicious smile. "How touching," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. The Alpha King and his little pet dancing as if they belonged together. The insult hit like a slap, but before I could respond, Marcus stepped protectively in front of me. "Careful, Lady Morgana. You forget yourself." "Do I?" She moved closer, her eyes glittering with triumph. "I think it's you who forgets, Your Majesty. Forgets your duty, your position, your responsibilities to this kingdom." Her gaze shifted to me with undisguised hatred, and all for a servant girl with delusions of grandeur. "She is no servant," Marcus said, his voice carrying the dangerous edge of absolute authority. "She is the last heir of House Rosethorn, and you will treat her with the respect due her station." "Her station?" Lady Morgana laughed, the sound sharp and cutting. "Her station is that of a traitor's daughter, raised among servants, with no education or refinement worthy of royal attention." She turned to address the crowd that had gathered around us. "Look at your king, so besotted with a pretty face that he forgets his duty to secure the succession with a worthy bride." The words hung in the air like poison gas. I felt every eye in the room turn to me, saw the speculation and judgment in their faces. Some looked sympathetic, others scandalized, but all were waiting to see how this drama would unfold. "My personal affairs are not your concern," Marcus said coldly, but I could see the political calculation behind his eyes. Lady Morgana had chosen her moment perfectly, forcing him to either defend me publicly or appear weak in front of his nobles. "Your personal affairs become everyone's concern when they threaten the stability of the realm," she countered smoothly. "This girl may carry noble blood, but she is untrained, uneducated, unsuitable to stand beside a king. Surely you see that your infatuation is clouding your judgment." Each word was like a blade finding its mark, because as much as I hated to admit it, Lady Morgana was right about many things. I had no training in statecraft, no education in the intricacies of court life, no preparation for the role I was apparently being considered for. I was still the servant girl who had grown up scrubbing floors and tending fires, no matter what blood ran in my veins. "Perhaps," Lady Morgana continued, pressing her advantage, "a demonstration would be instructive. Since the girl claims royal heritage, let her prove she deserves it. Let her show us she can handle the pressures that come with such a position." I felt a trap closing around me, but I couldn't see what form it would take. Marcus tensed beside me, clearly sensing the danger as well. "What kind of demonstration?" I asked, though every instinct screamed at me to remain silent. Lady Morgana's smile was razor-sharp. "A simple test of knowledge and grace. Answer a few questions about statecraft and protocol. Perform a few courtly skills. If you truly belong among us, it should be easy enough." The challenge was cleverly constructed. If I refused, I would appear cowardly and admit my inadequacy. If I accepted and failed, I would prove her point about my unsuitability. But if I somehow succeeded, well, Lady Morgana clearly didn't think that was a possibility worth worrying about. I felt Marcus's hand close around mine, warm and reassuring. "You don't have to do this," he murmured. "I won't allow—" "No," I said, finding my voice and my courage. "She's right. If I'm going to claim my heritage, I should be able to defend it." I turned to face Lady Morgana directly. "I accept your challenge," the crowd murmured with excitement and anticipation. I had just committed myself to what could very well be a public humiliation, but something inside me refused to back down. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the growing certainty that I was more than what others tried to make me. "Excellent," Lady Morgana purred. "Tomorrow evening, then, in the throne room before the entire court, we shall see what the lost princess is truly made of." The next day passed in a blur of anxiety and frantic preparation. Marcus had tried to help me prepare, spending hours in the library reviewing protocols and precedents, but we both knew that a lifetime of education couldn't be crammed into a single day. I felt like a gladiator preparing for the arena, knowing that my opponent held every advantage. "You don't have to prove anything to them," Marcus said for the 100th time as evening approached. We were in his private study, surrounded by books and scrolls that contained all the knowledge I was supposed to have absorbed from birth. "Yes, I do," I replied, smoothing down the formal court dress he had made for me, deep green silk that brought out my eyes, with the rosethorn crest embroidered in silver thread. "Not to them, but to myself. If I'm going to be with you, if I'm going to claim my birthright, I need to prove I can rise to meet it." He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs stroking across my cheekbones. "You are already everything you need to be. Your worth isn't determined by their arbitrary tests. But my acceptance might be," I said softly. "And you need their acceptance to rule effectively. I won't be the weakness they use against you." The pain that flashed across his features told me my words had hit their mark. He knew as well as I did that a king's personal choices always had political ramifications. If I became a liability to his reign, our love would become a burden neither of us could bear. When we entered the throne room that evening, it seemed as if the entire court had gathered to witness my trial. The great hall buzzed with excited conversation that died to whispers as I walked down the center aisle. I kept my chin high and my steps steady, though my heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Lady Morgana waited near the throne, dressed in her finest gown and wearing an expression of confident satisfaction. She had arranged a small table with various props, maps, scrolls, ceremonial items that I assumed would play a role in her test. Behind her stood several other noble ladies who clearly supported her cause, their faces showing varying degrees of anticipation and malice. Marcus took his place on the throne, but I could see the tension in his posture. He was being forced to watch as the woman he loved was subjected to public humiliation, unable to intervene without appearing weak or biased. It was a masterful political move by Lady Morgana, and we all knew it. "Citizens of the realm," Lady Morgana began, her voice carrying easily through the hall. "We gather tonight to witness a demonstration of worthiness. The girl who claims the noble heritage of House Rosethorn will prove her suitability for the elevated position she seeks." I forced myself to remain calm as she outlined the test. There would be 3 parts: questions about history and law, a demonstration of courtly skills, and finally a test of wisdom and judgment. Each part was designed to highlight my lack of proper education and training. "First," Lady Morgana announced, "questions of state. Tell us, claimant to Rosethorn, what are the traditional punishments for treason against the crown?" The question hit like a physical blow. She was asking me to recite the laws that had condemned my parents, to speak aloud the justifications for their deaths. I saw the cruel calculation in her eyes and realized this was more than just a test. It was psychological warfare. I took a breath and answered as steadily as I could. "Death for the principal traitors, exile for their immediate family, forfeiture of all lands and titles to the crown." My voice carried clearly through the silent hall. "Unless the crown chooses to show mercy. And what constitutes treason specifically? Taking up arms against the sovereign, providing aid to enemies of the realm, or attempting to undermine the legitimate authority of the crown." I paused, then added pointedly, "However, the definition of undermining authority has been interpreted broadly in the past." A murmur ran through the crowd at my subtle criticism of how the treason laws had been used against my family. Lady Morgana's eyes flashed with annoyance, but she continued, correct if incomplete. "Now name the 7 great houses of the realm and their current lords." This was easier territory. I had memorized the noble genealogies during my crash preparation. I recited the names and titles flawlessly, gaining confidence with each correct answer. The questions continued for what felt like hours. History, law, diplomatic protocols, trade agreements. Lady Morgana threw everything she could think of at me, clearly hoping to find a gap in my hastily acquired knowledge. But Marcus had been a thorough teacher, and my memory had always been sharp. I answered correctly more often than not, and when I didn't know something, I admitted it honestly rather than trying to bluff. "Very well," Lady Morgana said finally, clearly frustrated that I hadn't failed as spectacularly as she had hoped. "Now we move to practical skills. Demonstrate the proper courtesy for receiving a foreign ambassador." This was where I knew I would struggle. Courtly etiquette wasn't something that could be learned from books. It required years of practice and refinement, but I did my best, drawing on what I had observed during my years of invisible service in the palace. I performed the formal greeting, the precise bow, the ritualized exchange of pleasantries. It wasn't perfect. My movements lacked the fluid grace of someone born to it, but it was competent enough to draw approving nods from some of the watching nobles. "Adequate," Lady Morgana said dismissively. "Now, since you claim royal blood, surely you can demonstrate the art of falconry. It is, after all, the sport of kings." My heart sank. Falconry required not just knowledge, but practical experience with the birds, and I had never so much as held a falcon in my life. Lady Morgana knew this, of course. She was moving in for the kill. I must confess, I have no experience with falconry, I said, maintaining my dignity even as I admitted defeat. How unfortunate, Lady Morgana said with false sympathy. Surely a true royal would have been trained in all the noble arts from childhood. She turned to address the crowd. Perhaps this reveals the truth about our claimant's background. Blood may tell, but breeding tells more. The insult hung in the air like a challenge. I felt my cheeks burn with shame and anger, but before I could respond, an unexpected voice spoke from the crowd. May I suggest an alternative demonstration? Everyone turned to look at Master Benedict, the elderly librarian who rarely left his books to attend court functions. He stepped forward with the quiet confidence of someone who had lived long enough to fear very little. Your Majesty, he said, bowing to Marcus, if I might be permitted to pose the final test. Since this is to be a trial of wisdom and judgment, perhaps we should focus on those qualities rather than aristocratic pastimes. Marcus nodded, clearly curious about what the old scholar had in mind. Proceed, Master Benedict. The librarian turned to me with kind eyes. My dear, you have answered questions of law and demonstrated formal courtesies. But the most important quality in a ruler is not knowledge or grace. It is the ability to make difficult decisions under pressure, to balance competing needs, and to act with both justice and mercy. He paused, then posed his scenario. A plague has struck the kingdom. There is only enough medicine to save either the capital city, with its political and economic importance, or a rural province with a larger population, but less strategic value. The decision rests with you, and either choice will result in thousands of deaths. What do you do? The questions silenced the room completely. This wasn't about memorized facts or practiced skills. It was about moral judgment and practical wisdom. I could feel every eye on me, waiting to see how I would handle an impossible choice. I took a deep breath and considered the scenario carefully. There was no right answer, only different kinds of wrong, which meant I needed to explain not just my choice, but my reasoning. I would divide the medicine, I said finally. Neither choice is morally acceptable if it means deliberately sacrificing thousands of lives. Instead, I would send half to each location and put my best minds to work on producing more medicine as quickly as possible. It might mean both populations suffer longer, but it would also mean I haven't written off anyone as expendable. I looked directly at Lady Morgana as I continued. A ruler's first duty is to protect all their people, not to make cold calculations about who deserves to live based on their usefulness to the throne. The silence stretched for long moments. Then Master Benedict smiled and began to clap slowly. The sound echoed through the hall, and gradually others joined in. Not everyone. Lady Morgana and her supporters remained stony-faced, but enough to make it clear that my answer had resonated with many in the audience. A wise answer, Master Benedict announced. One that shows both practical intelligence and moral courage. This is indeed a young woman worthy of noble heritage. I felt a surge of relief and pride, but I also knew this was only the beginning. Lady Morgana might have lost this particular battle, but I could see in her eyes that the war was far from over. The weeks following my trial brought a mixture of triumph and trepidation. I had proven myself capable of rising to challenges, but in doing so, I had also painted a larger target on my back. Lady Morgana's hostility became more open, and I began to notice other signs that my position at court was becoming increasingly precarious. Marcus and I grew closer during this period, stealing moments together whenever we could manage it without causing too much scandal. He began including me in smaller political meetings, asking for my opinions on matters of state. I discovered that I had an intuitive grasp of human nature that served me well in reading the motivations and hidden agendas of various courtiers. You have good instincts, he told me one evening as we walked through his private gardens. The autumn air was crisp, and the last roses of the season perfumed the night with their sweet fragrance. You see through the masks people wear better than advisors who have been studying politics for decades. Growing up invisible gives you that skill, I replied. When people don't notice you're there, you learn to notice everything about them. He stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I want to make our arrangement official," he said. "Not marriage, not yet, but a formal betrothal. It would provide you with additional protection and make clear to everyone that you have my support." My heart raced at the suggestion, but I also felt a flutter of anxiety. That would make me even more of a target, and it would tie your reputation to mine permanently. "My reputation can withstand the association," he said firmly. "It's your safety I'm concerned about. The threats against you are becoming more specific, more credible." This was the first I'd heard of any threats. "What kind of threats?" His jaw tightened. "Attempts to tamper with your food, arrange riding accidents, even rumors of hired assassins. My security forces are working to verify the intelligence, but I'd rather err on the side of caution." The information hit me like a cold wave. I had been so focused on the political maneuvering and social challenges that I hadn't fully grasped how deadly the game had become. "It's because of what I represent," I said slowly, understanding dawning. "I'm not just a threat to Lady Morgana's power. I'm a threat to anyone who profited from my family's fall. If I'm officially restored to my position, there will be questions about what happened to Rosethorn lands and holdings." "Exactly. There are several noble families who received grants of your father's former properties. They would prefer you remain dead and forgotten rather than risk having to return what they've gained." The scope of the conspiracy against me was becoming clear, and it was larger and more dangerous than I had imagined. But instead of fear, I felt a growing anger at the injustice of it all. My parents had been murdered. I had been hidden away and forgotten. And now I was supposed to quietly disappear again to protect the comfort of those who had benefited from my family's destruction. "Then we move forward with the betrothal," I said decisively. "I won't be intimidated into hiding anymore." Marcus smiled at my determination, but I could see the worry in his eyes. "Are you certain? Once we make this announcement, there will be no going back. You'll be committed to a life of constant political scrutiny, endless protocol, and persistent danger." "I'm already committed," I said, stepping closer to him. "The moment you kissed me, the moment I chose to stay and fight rather than run. I committed myself to this path." I reached up to touch his face, feeling the slight roughness of stubble against my palm. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't make any more politically disastrous decisions." He laughed at that, the sound warm and rich in the quiet garden. "You think protecting a lost princess is politically disastrous?" "I think falling in love with her probably is," I said softly. The words hung between us, the first time either of us had spoken directly about love rather than attraction or desire. Marcus went very still, his eyes searching my face in the moonlight. "Is that what we're doing?" he asked quietly. "Falling in love?" "I can't speak for you," I said, my heart pounding at my own boldness. "But I know that what I feel for you goes far beyond gratitude or physical attraction. When I'm with you, I feel like I'm becoming who I was always meant to be. And when I'm not with you, I feel like part of me is missing." He pulled me into his arms then, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing in that throne room, terrified but defiant," he whispered against my hair. "I loved your courage, your grace under pressure, the way you refused to let them break you. And every day since then, I've loved you more." The confession sent warmth flooding through my entire body. To be loved by this man, this king who could have anyone he chose, felt like a miracle I didn't deserve but would treasure forever. "Then let's make it official," I said, pulling back to look into his eyes. "Let's give them something real to worry about." 2 days later, the betrothal was announced at a formal court ceremony. I wore a gown of silver and white with the rosethorn crest prominently displayed, and my mother's amulet gleaming at my throat. Marcus placed his own signet ring on my finger as a temporary token until a proper betrothal ring could be made. The reaction was immediate and intense. Some nobles congratulated us warmly, clearly hoping to curry favor with the future queen. Others maintained polite facades while undoubtedly calculating how this change would affect their own positions. But Lady Morgana's faction made no effort to hide their displeasure. "A grave mistake," I heard Lord Aldrich mutter to his companions as they passed my receiving line. He was one of the nobles who had received significant grants from Rosethorn lands. The king allows his heart to rule his head, and the kingdom will suffer for it. Lady Morgana herself approached with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Congratulations, Your Highness," she said, using my new title like a weapon. "I do hope you'll be very happy together, for however long it lasts." The threat was thinly veiled but clear enough. I met her gaze steadily, refusing to show any fear. "Thank you for your kind wishes, Lady Morgana," I replied with equal sweetness. "I'm sure our happiness will last exactly as long as it needs to." That night, after the celebrations had ended and the last guests had departed, Marcus and I retreated to his private chambers. I was exhausted from hours of performing the role of gracious bride-to-be, smiling and accepting congratulations while constantly watching for signs of danger. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked as he helped me remove the heavy ceremonial jewelry I had worn. "None," I said firmly, "though I suspect the real challenges are just beginning." "Undoubtedly, but we'll face them together." He kissed the side of my neck, sending shivers through my body. "My queen!" The title made my breath catch. In all the political maneuvering and survival strategies, I had sometimes lost sight of what we were really building. Not just a relationship, but a partnership that would shape the future of the kingdom. "Are you ready for that?" I asked, turning in his arms. "A queen who grew up scrubbing floors? Who still sometimes forgets which fork to use at formal dinners? I'm ready for a queen who understands what it means to struggle, who knows the value of hard work, who sees the kingdom from the bottom up instead of just the top down." His hands framed my face tenderly. "I'm ready for you exactly as you are." As he kissed me, I felt the last of my doubts melt away. Whatever storms were coming, we would weather them together. And perhaps, in the end, love really would be enough to conquer all. The attack came 3 weeks after our betrothal announcement, during what should have been a routine morning ride through the royal forest. I had taken to riding early each day, both for the exercise and for the precious moments of freedom it provided from the suffocating protocols of court life. Marcus had assigned 2 guards to accompany me, men he trusted implicitly, but even the best protection can be overcome by a well-planned ambush. The arrows came from multiple directions, striking down my guards before they could even draw their swords. My horse reared in terror as masked figures emerged from the underbrush, and I found myself surrounded by at least 6 men, all heavily armed and clearly professional in their movements. "Don't resist, and you won't be hurt," their leader called out, though the crossbow trained on my chest suggested otherwise. "We just need to have a conversation with you, Your Highness." I recognized the mockery in how he said my title. These weren't random bandits. They were political assassins with a specific agenda. As they forced me from my horse and bound my hands, I tried to memorize every detail about them, knowing that if I survived, the information might be crucial. They took me to an abandoned hunting lodge deep in the forest, a place that had clearly been prepared for this purpose. Inside, I found myself face to face with Lord Aldrich and 2 other nobles I recognized from court, all men who had benefited significantly from my family's downfall. "Lady Alara," Lord Aldrich said with false courtesy, "forgive the dramatic nature of our meeting, but circumstances required discretion." "Kidnapping and murder hardly seem discreet," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear coursing through my veins. "Regrettable but necessary. You see, your sudden return from the dead, as it were, has created certain complications for those of us who have been faithful servants of the crown for many years." "Faithful servants who profited handsomely from my parents' murders. You mean..." Lord Aldrich's face darkened at my blunt accusation. "Your parents were traitors who got exactly what they deserved. The fact that their child was allowed to live was a mercy that perhaps should have been reconsidered." "What do you want?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Your abdication," said Lord Harwick, another of my captors. "A formal renunciation of any claim to Rosethorn titles or lands signed and witnessed. In exchange, we'll provide you with a substantial sum of money and safe passage to whatever distant country you choose to retire to. And if I refuse, then you'll suffer the same fate as your parents," Lord Aldrich said bluntly. The kingdom has survived without House Rosethorn for 20 years. It can continue to do so indefinitely. I stared at these men who spoke so casually of murder and wondered how they slept at night. But I also realized that this kidnapping was a desperate move, which meant they were more afraid of me than I had realized. "You're terrified," I said slowly, understanding dawning. "It's not just about the lands and titles, is it? You're afraid of what else I might uncover if I start digging into my family's death." The slight tightening around Lord Aldrich's eyes told me I had hit the mark. There were more secrets here, deeper conspiracies that my restoration to nobility might expose. "What did you do?" I pressed. "What are you so desperate to keep hidden?" "Nothing that need concern you," Lord Harwick said quickly. But his nervous glance at Lord Aldrich betrayed him. "Actually, everything concerns me now," I said, feeling a strange sense of calm descend over me. "I'm going to be queen. That means every crime committed in this kingdom becomes my responsibility to address." "You'll never be queen," Lord Aldrich snarled. "The king's infatuation with you is temporary. Once you're gone, he'll choose a more suitable bride and forget you ever existed." "Is that what you're counting on? Because from where I sit, it seems like you've greatly underestimated Marcus's commitment to justice, and to me." Before any of them could respond, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the forest. My captors tensed, clearly not expecting company. Through the grimy windows of the lodge, I could see royal guards surrounding the building, with Marcus himself at their head. "How did they find us so quickly?" Lord Harwick whispered, panic creeping into his voice. "Because you're dealing with people who are smarter than you," I said with satisfaction. "Did you really think kidnapping the king's betrothed would go unnoticed?" The truth was, I had no idea how Marcus had tracked us down so fast, but I wasn't about to let my captors know that. I needed them to believe that their plan had been doomed from the start. "Open these doors in the name of the king!" Marcus's voice rang out with absolute authority. Lord Aldrich drew his sword, clearly planning to fight his way out, but the other conspirators looked less convinced. They were politicians, not warriors, and the prospect of facing Marcus's legendary fighting skills clearly terrified them. "This is your last chance to surrender peacefully," Marcus called. "Otherwise, I'll consider this an act of war against the crown." "Let me go," I said quietly to my captors. "Surrender now, and you might live to see trial. Fight, and he'll cut you down where you stand." Lord Harwick was the first to crack. He threw down his weapon and moved toward the door. "I yield," he called out. "We yield." The others had little choice but to follow his lead. As the door burst open and royal guards flooded in, I felt an overwhelming surge of relief. Marcus swept me into his arms before the ropes had even been cut from my wrists, holding me so tightly I could feel his heart racing against my chest. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, his hands running over me as if searching for injuries. "I'm fine," I assured him, though now that the immediate danger had passed, I was beginning to shake with reaction. "Just scared." "They'll pay for this," he said, his voice carrying a lethal promise. "Every single one of them." As the conspirators were led away in chains, Lord Aldrich managed one last parting shot. "You think you've won, girl? But this is bigger than you know. There are others who won't be satisfied with your exile. Some secrets are worth killing for." His words sent a chill through me, confirming what I had begun to suspect. This conspiracy reached much deeper than I had imagined, and my enemies were more numerous and dangerous than I had realized. But as I looked up at Marcus, saw the fierce protectiveness in his eyes and felt the strength of his arms around me, I knew that whatever came next, I wouldn't face it alone. We were partners now, in love and in the defense of justice, and that bond was stronger than any conspiracy our enemies could devise. The trials of my kidnappers became the sensation of the court. Under interrogation, Lord Aldrich and his co-conspirators revealed a web of corruption that reached back to the very beginning of Marcus's reign. They had not only profited from my family's death, but had been systematically looting the royal treasury, selling military secrets to neighboring kingdoms, and undermining Marcus's authority at every turn. 20 years, Marcus said grimly as we reviewed the evidence in his private study. "They've been betraying the crown for 20 years, and I never suspected." "You trusted them because they seemed loyal," I said, placing my hand over his where it rested on the desk. "That trust isn't a weakness, It's what makes you a good king. A good king protects his people. A good king doesn't let traitors operate under his nose for decades. His self-recrimination was painful to witness. A good king learns from his mistakes and builds a better future, I countered, which is exactly what we're going to do. The investigation had also revealed something else troubling. Lady Morgana's involvement in the conspiracy was deeper than we had suspected. While she hadn't been directly involved in the kidnapping plot, she had been feeding information to the conspirators and had been planning to move against us if their initial plan had failed. She's too dangerous to leave at court, Marcus said. But exile would only give her a base of operations to plan more attacks from. What are our options? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Execution for treason would be justified by the evidence. But she's the Queen's stepmother. Killing her would create a diplomatic crisis with her family's allies. The weight of political leadership was becoming more real to me with each passing day. Every decision had consequences that rippled outward in ways that were impossible to predict. The woman who had tormented me and tried to destroy my reputation was also someone whose death could destabilize the kingdom. What does your heart tell you? I asked quietly. Marcus looked surprised by the question. My heart? Not the king, the man. What does Marcus think should happen to her? He was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the gardens where we had shared our first real conversation about love. My heart says she's caused enough pain for one lifetime, that maybe mercy is more powerful than justice in this case. Then we show mercy, I said simply, but with conditions that protect us and the kingdom. In the end, we offered Lady Morgana a choice. Exile to a distant convent where she would live under religious supervision for the rest of her life, or face trial for treason with all the potential consequences. She chose exile, but not without one last attempt to wound us. You think you've won, she hissed as she was being escorted from the palace. But mark my words, a kingdom that puts a servant on the throne is a kingdom that has forgotten its proper order. There will be others who remember what you've chosen to forget. Her words echoed Lord Aldrich's warning about other enemies, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. We had defeated this particular conspiracy, but it was clear that the threat to our reign was far from over. Despite the political turmoil, Marcus and I grew closer during this period. The shared danger had forged a bond between us that went beyond attraction or even love. We had become true partners, facing each challenge as a united front. The formal ceremony of our wedding was planned for the spring, but in many ways, we were already functioning as king and queen. I spent hours each day learning the intricacies of statecraft, working with Marcus's most trusted advisors to understand everything from trade negotiations to military strategy. Master Benedict became my unofficial tutor, his vast knowledge and patient teaching style helping me absorb years of education in a matter of months. You have a natural aptitude for this, he told me one afternoon as we reviewed diplomatic correspondence. Your instincts for reading people serve you well in understanding the subtleties of international relations. I still feel like I'm constantly playing catch-up, I admitted. Everyone else was born to this life. I'm just trying not to embarrass myself or the crown. Your Highness, he said gently, if I may speak frankly. I nodded, appreciating his honesty. The nobility you're trying so hard to emulate has grown soft and insular over the generations. They've forgotten what it means to struggle, to fight for survival, to understand the lives of common people. Your different background isn't a liability, it's exactly what this kingdom needs. His words were reassuring, but I still felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. Every decision I made would affect thousands of lives, and the margin for error was terrifyingly small. It was during one of our evening strategy sessions that Marcus brought up a subject we had been carefully avoiding: children and the succession. We need to discuss the future of the dynasty, he said carefully. The nobles will expect an heir within a reasonable time after our marriage. I felt my cheeks warm at the intimate implications of his words. Are you asking me if I want children? I'm asking if you're prepared for the pressure that will come with that expectation. Royal pregnancies are public affairs. Every aspect will be scrutinized, debated, and politicized. The thought was daunting, but also thrilling. The idea of creating a family with Marcus, of raising children who would inherit both the throne and the values we shared, filled me with a warmth that had nothing to do with politics or duty. "I want children with you," I said simply. "Not because the kingdom demands heirs, but because I can't imagine a more beautiful legacy than a family built on love rather than arrangement." His smile was radiant. "I hoped you would say that. Though I should warn you, royal children have very little privacy. They grow up under constant observation and pressure." "Then we'll make sure they also grow up with love and support," I replied. "We'll teach them that their worth comes from their character, not their titles." "We'll raise them to be better rulers than we are," he agreed, pulling me into his arms. "Leaders who understand both power and compassion." As he kissed me, I felt the future stretching out before us like a golden road. Yes, there would be challenges and enemies and impossible decisions, but there would also be love, partnership, and the chance to build something better than what had come before. When we finally pulled apart, breathless and laughing, Marcus rested his forehead against mine. "I love you," he said simply. "Whatever comes next, whatever storms we have to weather, that will never change." "I love you too," I whispered back. "Forever and always." And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of his arms and the promise of our shared future, I believed that love really could conquer all, even the darkness that still threatened from the shadows. Spring arrived with a burst of new life that seemed to mirror the hope filling my heart. The cherry trees bloomed in cascades of pink and white. The gardens erupted in riots of colour, and the very air seemed charged with possibility. Our wedding was set for the first day of May, when the kingdom would celebrate not just our union but the renewal of life itself. The preparations were elaborate beyond anything I had ever imagined. My wedding dress was a masterpiece of silk and lace, embroidered with both the royal arms and the restored crest of House Rosethorn. The ceremony would take place in the great cathedral, followed by a celebration that would last 3 days and include nobles from across the known world. But despite all the pageantry and political significance, what mattered most to me was the quiet moment I would share with Marcus when we spoke our vows to each other. Everything else was just decoration around the central truth of our love. The night before the wedding, as tradition dictated, Marcus and I spent our last evening as unmarried people apart from each other. I was surrounded by ladies-in-waiting and well-wishers, but I found myself thinking about how much my life had changed in just a few short months. From servant to princess to queen-to-be, it seemed impossible that one person's life could contain such dramatic transformations. "You look thoughtful," said Lady Catherine, one of the few noble ladies who had genuinely welcomed me from the beginning. She had become a true friend over the past weeks, offering guidance on court etiquette without making me feel inadequate. "I'm thinking about destiny," I replied. "About whether we choose our fate or whether it chooses us? Perhaps it's both," she suggested. "Perhaps destiny provides the opportunities, but we still have to choose whether to seize them." I thought about that as I prepared for sleep. Had I chosen this path or had it chosen me? The answer, I realized, was that it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was here now, ready to take on the responsibilities and joys of queenship with Marcus by my side. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of flowers through my chambers. As my ladies helped me into my dress and arranged my hair, I felt a profound sense of calm settle over me. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them. The cathedral was packed with representatives from every corner of the kingdom and beyond. As I walked down the long aisle on Master Benedict's arm, he had graciously agreed to stand in for the father I had never known. I saw faces filled with curiosity, approval, and in some cases barely concealed hostility. But none of that mattered when I saw Marcus waiting for me at the altar. He wore the ceremonial robes of kingship, but his eyes held only love as he watched me approach. When I reached his side and took his hands in mine, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. There was only him, only us, only the promise we were about to make to each other. The ceremony itself was a blur of ancient words and ritual gestures, but when we reached the vows we had written for each other, time seemed to slow. "Alara," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed cathedral. You came into my life like dawn breaking over a dark landscape. You brought light where there had been shadow, hope where there had been resignation, love where there had been only duty. I promise to cherish not just the crown you will wear, but the woman who wears it. I promise to be your partner in all things, to value your counsel, to protect your dreams, and to love you with every breath in my body for all the days of my life. Tears blurred my vision as I spoke my own vows. Marcus, you saw me when I was invisible, valued me when I was nothing, loved me when I didn't even love myself. You taught me that true nobility comes not from birth but from character, that real power lies in service to others, and that love is the strongest force in any kingdom. I promise to stand beside you in times of peace and times of war, to share your burdens and your joys, to be your queen in public and your beloved in private, and to love you beyond the end of time itself. When the Archbishop pronounced us husband and wife, the cathedral erupted in celebration. But in that moment, as Marcus kissed me with tender reverence, I heard only the beating of our hearts in perfect rhythm. The celebrations that followed were magnificent. We danced until dawn, feasted on delicacies from across the known world, and received congratulations from dignitaries who had travelled vast distances to witness our union. But the moment I treasured most came near the end of the evening, when Marcus and I finally escaped to a balcony overlooking the city. "How does it feel to be queen?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind as we looked out over our kingdom. "Like coming home," I said honestly. Not to the title or the palace, but to myself, to who I was always meant to be. "And what about the future? Any regrets about the path we've chosen?" I leaned back against his chest, feeling his warmth surround me. "None. There will be challenges, I know that. People who question our choices, who try to divide us, who think a former servant has no business wearing a crown. But we'll face all of that together." "Together," he agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. "Always together." As we stood there in the moonlight, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. It had begun with fear and uncertainty, with my terrified walk to the throne room and his recognition of my mother's amulet. It had included betrayal and danger, political maneuvering and life-threatening conspiracies. But it had also included the most beautiful discovery of my life, that love really could transform everything, that two people who chose to trust each other could build something stronger than any external force trying to tear them down. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, sensing my contemplative mood. "I'm thinking about the girl who was dragged before your throne just a few months ago," I said. "She was so afraid, so convinced she didn't belong anywhere. If you had told her she would end up here wearing a crown and married to the king who terrified her, she never would have believed it." "That girl had more courage than she knew," Marcus said softly. "She stood up to tests designed to humiliate her, faced down kidnapping and death threats, and never once backed down from what was right. She always belonged here. She just needed time to realize it." As the celebrations continued below us and the stars wheeled overhead, I felt a deep sense of peace settle into my bones. This was just the beginning of our story, not the end. There would be children to raise, a kingdom to govern, and undoubtedly more enemies to face down. But we would meet it all with the same love and partnership that had brought us through everything so far. "Ready for the next adventure, Your Majesty?" Marcus asked with a smile that made my heart skip. "With you?" "I'm ready for anything," I replied, and kissed my husband under the stars that blessed our new beginning. The future stretched out before us like an unwritten book, full of possibility and promise. And as we walked back into the palace hand in hand, ready to begin our reign together, I knew that whatever that future held, we would write it together, with love as our guide and each other as our strength. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of love, courage, and transformation. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know where you're reading from around the world. Don't forget to like this story if it moved you, and subscribe for more tales that explore the depths of human emotion and the power of love to overcome any obstacle. Until our next story together, May your own journey be filled with the courage to embrace your destiny and the wisdom to recognize love when it finds you.